drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took them in. I invite you to rise in body and or spirit and join in singing this morning's opening hymn.
Welcome to the Unitarian Church. My name is Nathan. I'm one of your ministers. I'm very pleased to welcome you today. We've got a lot of really cool stuff going on that I even wrote on this little note. First thing you should know is during middle hour, for those of you online, those of you who are local and online can still come down for middle hour. Those of you here in person, after this service, we have a social justice team meeting in room 1. We have a what it means to be UU in room 6. I knew that. And we also have programming for children and youth. And during the service, we still want to prioritize kids being able to be in worship, but for 5 and under, if you need a break of some kind, there is childcare available for your kids. This upcoming week, we're having an anti-oppression study group. If you're interested, you can go onto the internet and find out more about it. And next week, the whole service will be themed around the bridge over troubled waters. Through troubled waters, not over. It'll go through. Isn't that a tunnel?
Maybe.
Anyway, we are glad you are with us today. It's good to be in church together.
Morning, y'all. So this morning, the lesson is a story from the Hebrew Scriptures, what the Christians call the Old Testament, what the Jewish people call the Tanakh. This is the story that the earliest Jews told about how human beings came to be in the world. Now, when Unitarian Universalists tell stories like this, we don't tell them as literal truth. We tell them as story and metaphor. So this is not a story that's literally true. And yet you'll see images and metaphors from this story in lots of places in our culture. So see if you have heard this story before or one like it. God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. God planted a garden in Eden with every tree that was pleasant to see and good to eat, and the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil were in the center of the Garden of Eden. God commanded the man, "You may eat freely of every tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. If you do, you shall die." And then God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." And he fashioned a woman out of one of the man's ribs. And the man and the woman named, what were their names? Adam and Eve. And the man and the woman named Adam and Eve lived happily in the garden without clothes or any cares. Now there was a serpent in the garden who said to Eve, "If you eat the fruit of the tree, you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So she took a bite of the apple, and she shared it with her husband, and then they realized they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together to make clothes, and they hid from God. God asked Adam, "Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" Adam said, "The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." So God said to Eve, "What have you done?" And she said, "The serpent tricked me." God cursed the serpent to forever crawl on his belly. He cursed Eve with the pain of childbearing and the rule of her husband, and Adam with the hard work of growing all their food. God said, "Now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might also eat from the tree of life and live forever." So God sent Adam and Eve away from the Garden of Eden and placed the cherubim at the gate with a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life.
The sharing of stones ritual here at the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge is a time in our service where we take pause to come forth to share stones to honor the joy and sorrows of our lives with this community. Visitors are also welcome to take part in this ritual. Before we begin, I would like to uplift our well wishes for continued health for Vicki Berry, who is recovering from surgery. Again, please sign the cards that are out on the table in the breezeway with a lovely blue tablecloth as you're leaving today. We now invite those who wish to come forward to line up at the east or west wall. Where's the east? Which way is the east? East or west wall, and come forth as we share in our sharing of stones ritual. Our chalice lighting words: "With hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love."
Thursday was the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast. For those of you who don't know, the Interfaith Federation has been around for more than 30 years. This congregation was at the earliest conversations about the Interfaith Federation and the Prayer Breakfast. We were part of the discussions that broadened it from an ecumenical society to a synagogues and churches organization to a truly interfaith organization. Anyway, we met at the Catholic Life Center on Acadian Thruway. There were about 200 people in attendance, I guess give or take. Other than a smattering of masks, it looked exactly like the prayer breakfast in 2019. Same logo, same exact grits and mixed fruit that they've had for the entire time that I've been there, which I'm thrilled with. I'm not complaining. It's the exact same. They had the same candle layout, the same looking order of service. If you didn't know any better, it could have been any year. Except it wasn't the prayer breakfast for 2019. The executive director had retired, and there was a new executive director. Some key leaders in attendance, both clergy and lay, are no longer with us, either because of moving away or retirement or death. To the best that I can figure, the 3 people who were invited to speak, they were not a part of the community at the last prayer breakfast. The topic of the breakfast was hope, but this time hope felt different. I don't think I've been to a prayer breakfast where they didn't mention hope, but that concept usually kind of floats around in the back of the room as like almost an ornament, sort of looking for a chair to sit in the back. But that wasn't where it lived this time. It was front and center. We may have made a throne for hope and put it behind the makeshift chancel. And that is what I would like for us to explore today. The sermon title is just This New World. It's a build off of an entire month's theme, which is trying to articulate who we are and where we are. So remember that when the arc of this church is in late July, when Reverend Chris joined us, and we ended 4 or 5 years of ministerial transition, however you want to describe it, and we were finally open for almost a solid year, inside or outside. But I mean, there's a bunch of markers that we decided this is the next chapter in this church's life, probably the next chapter in your life as well. Well, if you're going to write a next chapter, which we'll do next month, sort of, you have to actually know what is going on in the story to be able to write the chapter. So these past few weeks, we talked about what it means to be saved from the beginning and the profound impact of what would happen if our theology or theologies were realized in the world. We explored what this new Unitarian Universalism we live in is and what it would mean to raise Unitarian Universalists. Essentially, this whole month is us acknowledging something. It's us trying to see ourselves and our faith and our world as it actually exists. It's looking at ourselves at that prayer breakfast that looks exactly like it always has, except to acknowledge that it is not at all what it always was. That we are living in a new world. And our task as a religious people is to acknowledge this new world.
This reading comes to us from Alberto Rios, titled, A House Called Tomorrow. You are not 15 or 12 or 17. You are 100 wild centuries, and 15 bringing with you in every breath and in every step, everyone who has come before you, and all the yous that you have been, the mothers of your mother, the fathers of your father. If someone in your family tree was trouble, 100 were not. The bad do not win, not finally, no matter how loud they are. We simply would not be here if that were so. You are made fundamentally from the good. With this knowledge, you never march alone. You are the breaking news of the century. You are the good who has come forward through it all, even if so many days feel otherwise. But think, when you as a child learned to speak, it's not that you didn't know words. It's that from the centuries you knew so many. and it's hard to choose the words that will be your own. From those centuries, we human beings bring with us the simple solutions and songs, the rivers, the river bridges, and the star charts and song harmonies, all in the service to a simple idea, that we can make a house called tomorrow. What we bring finally into the new day, every day, is ourselves. And that's all we need to start. That everything we require to keep going, look back only for as long as you must, then go forward into the history you will make. Be good, then better. Write books, cure disease, make us proud. Make yourself proud, and those who came before you. When you hear thunder, hear it as their applause. And now I invite you to rise and sing the next hymn for the morning.
What I'm about to say is not in the sermon, but I want to say something that happens in this church, and I'm hesitant to say it out loud as to manifest it. But in the before times, we would call this the magic of the prelude, which is when we would start the bell, when we ring the bell, there would be about 5 people in the service. You've seen it now, right? And I would go, oh God, no one's coming today. And then something happens at the end of the prelude, and we're full. So what some of you may have missed is we do have childcare for 5 and under. If you want to choose it, it is not required, but it is one of the options. We want families to be able to worship together. Back to the sermon. So you may recognize the tune to that hymn. We have never sung it. We haven't sung it in like 4 or 5 years, I don't think. But I just want you to mark it. I'm going to come back to it at the end of this part of the sermon. This past June, I flew to Portland to go to our General Assembly. This is after they removed the mask mandates on the planes, so most of the people were unmasked. I had already had COVID in January. I'd had all my shots, so I wasn't particularly worried about getting it in the same way that I was in in the past. It was only the second time I'd flown since the shutdown. I know staying fully hermetically sealed masked is close to impossible through an entirety of a trip, especially one that requires 17 layovers, as any trip out of the Baton Rouge airport does. But I still did my best to mask because I didn't want to get it, and more importantly, I didn't want to spread it, and also more importantly, I didn't want it to mess up my trip. So at one point on the plane was about like a third masked. I got hungry and I started that awkward mask dance of taking the mask down to eat a snack, as if somehow viruses know that they should take a transmission break when we're eating. And at one point with my mask down, I looked around, and for a few seconds, I looked at the mask in my hand, and I thought I must have made the whole thing up. It felt like a weird fever dream. It was almost like none of the trauma that all of us had been through had ever even happened. There at 30,000 feet, I actually legitimately wondered if the thing that had sucked up so much of my emotional, logistical, and spiritual energy over the last 2 years was something I had completely made up. Anyone else felt that? Okay, good. When we are thinking about this new world we live in, what we're really thinking about is the difference between the world as we think it is, or fear it is, or hope it is, or the world as it used to be, and the world we are actually living in. Our entire task as a religious people is to constantly re-examine and discern the crisp and clear reality of the world we are currently living in. How many of you know the word hermeneutics? Oh. Online people, I don't know how many of you raise your hand, but more than 0 raise their hands here. I don't fully understand it, but it's an expensive academic term that essentially means how we learn or interpret. It's used especially for biblical stories. I had it explained to me this way by Mark Hicks. He's a professor at Meadville Lombard, one of our theological schools. He said, imagine if you have an infinity sign. That's like a sideways 8. You put your finger at the center. So that is the present. That's where you currently are. And as you I should do it backwards for you so it's visually appropriate. As you trace it forward, you go into the future, and whatever topic you were learning about, maybe it's the story of Eden or God or the Civil War or Aru, as you trace your finger forward, I didn't do the math on how hard it would be to reverse this as I was writing it. As you trace your finger forward, you are going to examine that topic as you and as the world ages. And then as you trace it back around and you think about how you've thought about this same topic in the past when you were younger. And it keeps going like that over and over. That's the hermeneutics. I'm sharing this with you to help you have a tool to help us interpret and understand how to see the world clearly. Most of the time, people are living slightly behind that infinity sign. And a few people live as if we've progressed into the future more than we actually have. Saying we are in the past leads us to feeling perpetually left behind. And saying we are slightly ahead to where the world is leads us to perpetual frustration and disappointment. It is okay to nudge one way or the other, but to actually see it, we as a religious people must be right at that center. Does that make sense? Or is that too? All right, good. After a sermon a few weeks ago, I talked to a history professor and a member of this church who used a word that I don't remember. Can you say it? Historiography, which I definitely remembered. Is gonna get worse, Aaron, so just hold on. And he said this is kind of the concept that we use when we talk about events from history. So the example is right now, we are comparing the state of America as it relates to race and misinformation and political divisions, and we keep comparing it to the Civil War, about 200, someone do the math, almost 200 years ago. But at the time of the Civil War, they were comparing it to something that happened in England in the 1600s that I don't remember. I don't need you to shout it out. In other words, we understand our new world based on the old world. But the old world didn't understand itself as we assume it did. And often, the world as it is not how we pretend the world is. Does that all make sense? All right. I didn't count on you being here, so I was not prepped to be held accountable to what I say, which I guess is a minister problem every week. And often, the world as it is not how we pretend the world is. Just as I did on the plane, we experience a great spiritual dissonance when the world as people describe it does not match the world where we are. I am very worried about the fact that there seems to be two or more completely different information streams in our country, and the divides feel insurmountably complex. And the fact that the very survival of our planet depends on us at least acknowledging certain facts. And yet, we have always lived in a country where different people lived in different realities and had different facts. We used to live in a world, and maybe we still do, probably we still do, where white people wouldn't even acknowledge that black people were people. There were newspapers, media dedicated to different versions of this fact. We don't have to have every person share the same reality for us to have a hope in a world that will progress. So as we try and interpret things, we look at our current reality, and as we age, as we progress forward, our views of that change, and then we will trace our fingers. This is so confusing to do it backwards. Can you all just do it yourselves in your head? I'm going to stop doing this. As we trace our fingers toward, we think about, let's just say, the story of Eden. So when you are graduating college or empty nesting or retiring or in your last days, you think about the story of Eden differently than you currently do now or did a year ago or when you were a little child or wherever you are. Okay, so back to the spiritual dissonance before I went on the whole hermeneutics thing. The spiritual dissonance of what happens when the reality we experience does not match the reality we are being fed. We have a few different choices for what to do as a religious people. We can get mad at the state of the world and shout into the waterfall, which is what I am prone to do. We could get angry or angrier with no intention to actually change anything, also what I am prone to do. We can shut it down, pretend it all doesn't exist, just give up. Or we can do what Lee did last Sunday. You didn't know you were going to be in this part. See, there's a hymn in our hymnal. For those who really want to follow along, it's number 66. You don't need to. I'm going to describe it all. But it's all about celebrating the summer. I'm sure it's a very sweet hymn if the summer doesn't feel dangerous and oppressive. If you live somewhere where summer is nice. But the lyrics do not work here. In fact, they work so poorly, it creates a spiritual dissonance for me that we've actually utilized in worship to point out the dissonance. There's a line in the song about how the soil is moistened by the rain and the grass is green again. We live in a place where the amount of rain we get actually scares me. Can we take a moment to collectively breathe and acknowledge how scary hurricane season has felt this year? Just a breath, just. There's also a line in the song about, well, first it says, in the cool of summer evening. You moved here from New York. Have you experienced the cool of summer?
I grew up in mountains. I've experienced in mountains cool summer.
Yeah.
It's 4,000 feet higher than here.
That's only the first half of the line. The cool of summer evening where the dancing insects play. Ignoring love bug, which I like, I don't need any more dancing insects anywhere in my life. Anyway. So what Lee did was to rework, I mean, it's a lovely hymn. It really is lovely. But Lee reworked the lyrics so that it matched the realities that many of us are living. It's what so many of you do when you match your weekly real lived experience of a more fundamentalist, dogmatic, almost regressive Louisiana cultures, and you find a way to interpret your own set of values onto the things that everyone is projecting onto you over and over and over, right? Instead of shouting into the waterfall, which I am prone to do, Lee just redid the art so that it's supposed to reflect what we are actually experiencing and made it reflect our lives. And that, in a nutshell, for those who need to leave early, halfway through the service, that is what we should do as a church.
Each month, we here at the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge select an organization that's out in the community living our values in ways that we collectively can't. As Reverend Nathan alluded to, this week we had the pleasure of having my first Interfaith Federation of Greater Baton Rouge, my first time attending the breakfast, and there was 200 folks. I even chatted with the bishop of the Catholic diocese here, and I have a story for you when we get to that point, and I chatted with longtime ministers, African-American ministers of some of the Baptist churches here, and I felt so included because of my UU values, not because of the differences in theologies that we share. Today, our offering will go to the Interfaith Federation, but specifically its program called the Holy Grill. Every day, well, Monday through Friday, they serve hot meals at noon. I will be going again this Friday to learn and be in community authentically with the people of the Zion City. So we are now going to receive our offering with great humility and gratitude, this morning's offering.
So I want to spend a couple of minutes on the Adam and Eve story from earlier. I have a new interpretation that will not leave my brain. I have a quick misogyny aside for you, by the way. Adam is actually spelled A-D-H-A-M, and it's a play off of Adhamam, which is Hebrew for dirt. So it's actually humans created from dirt, and then Eve is life. So if you would like to interpret this not as a man and a woman, but as a human and then life interacting in the garden and doing all of the consuming from the tree of good and evil, fruit of good and evil. That's one way that, it's an aside, it's not what I'm going to interpret, but just to take that one with you. Throughout most of my ministry with you, I've tended to think of the Adam and Eve story as a story about hitting puberty. When you were a child, for those of you who are children, this is what is coming up for you. You may not know about starvation and death and worry and suffering, and you may live in Eden. Paradise, that is. And it wasn't until Adam and Eve ate from the fruit, not an apple, but the fruit of what the world actually is like. It says, actually, what is the actual word when they became like God? It was something, it was in the, anyway. when they actually learned about the knowledge of good and evil and became more, I guess, have access to their divine. It wasn't until they grew up that they were expelled from Eden. I don't know if I'm reaching for a new interpretation because I have kids and having kids remind me of how scary and hard being a child is. Or if I'm changing it because that's where I am right now, or I just need it to work for this sermon. But for whatever reason, I see Adam and Eve as just living in a new reality. My hermeneutics of the story has changed as I've traced forwards and backwards through my experience. We like to think of the past, the time before we knew how difficult living was, as idyllic, as a paradise itself. But what if that totally misses the point? What if Adam and Eve were destined to eat from that fruit no matter what? What if the thing that was going to happen is at some point they would be so traumatized by this world that they would go out and they would wear clothes not necessarily for shame or to hide their nakedness, but to protect themselves? What if the world expelled them from, and what if the world that was Eden, when they were expelled, I always think of it as sort of them leaving and going to a different place. But what if it's the exact same land and it just disappeared from under them? So if we play the myth forward, all of creation, according to the Adam and Eve story, only happened after they left Eden, after Eden was gone for them. All of us existing, if we're playing the myth out, only happened because they went and lived in the real world. Because they were able to learn about the world, to venture out on their own. And actually, not on their own, they ventured out together as people. They took risks, they suffered, they learned about the great, complicated world we've all been given. Maybe our job as a religious people is to leave Eden. Maybe our job as a religious people is to get dirty with the world and to trust that no matter how muddy it gets, no matter how difficult it gets, that we will never be unworthy of divine love. That we will still be held. Because maybe that is where the liberation happens, when they leave. When we can see this beautiful and complicated world as it actually is and know we are still loved and worthy. So I wonder, what is keeping me, from taking the risks to go be in this world?
Our next reading is from Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, called Whitecaps. In the beginning was the ripple that no one saw, the roar that no one heard, the surge that, the surge that no one felt. Now we ride those waves sent forth by the sacred roar. Ripples of that first moment, waves riding time's undercurrent. Our lives, white caps upon its surface, rising, peaking, breaking. Manifestations of an ever swelling creation. We emerge, awaken, witness, and savor a miracle. Life surging through us, we crest, then silently subside.
Would you join me in a moment of prayer and reflection? Whatever that thing is that holds us together, that many have called God, the thing that we can see when we see family and justice and love and kindness, be with us on this day. And hold all those who are broken or tired or sad or mourning, all those who long for a better world, all those who are trying to build the world as we know it could be, all those who have been left behind. Help provoke in us a spark, a fire, a joy for this living. Help us to figure out what is keeping us from being fully present in the gift that we have been given. May we be beacons of hope and of love. Amen. Let's rise for this next hymn.
Last reading excerpted from one of our colleagues' amazing book called After the Good News. The Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd is her name. She writes, "Hope is different. Like faith, hope is the exact opposite of certainty. It does not presume an outcome for good or for ill. It lies in the waiting moment when the tug from both directions is not yet fully resolved, and when a great many things are still possible. It moves in the humble spaces that open when we allow ourselves to be uncertain and thus not fully self-contained. It is the possibility, though not the inevitability, of a better way."
So the God that I know, that I experience, and if that term doesn't work for you, think of whatever that thing is that holds you connected to this world and to each other, despite the fact that the pain of doing so should necessitate being completely separate from everybody else. But that God that I know is that the fact that we can see, if we can see the world as it actually is, we will be pulled towards justice, pulled towards the world as it actually could be. That is our task as a religious people. When I was at that prayer breakfast, if I stayed fully open to seeing the world as it was, I could see not only the suffering in the room, but also the resilience. That hope that was talked about so clearly was more palpable the more I could acknowledge the new world we are living in. And as disconnected as I felt on that plane in my flight to Portland with the mask in my hand, wondering if everything in this pandemic was a dream, then I arrived at General Assembly with thousands of other Unitarian Universalists who created the container, the space, for me to acknowledge how hard everything that we've been through is. What I felt there, which is what I hope you feel every Sunday in this church, is a true acknowledgement of who and what we have all experienced, and that pain and suffering was real, and that it proved our humanness. The racism and transphobia and homophobia and classism and all of those things that create separateness intended to allow power to amass with the few, none of whatever of that you have experienced is right. It shouldn't be, but it also deserves to be acknowledged, and that you've come through it and you are here worshiping with us together today. Maybe we've never fully left Eden. Maybe Eden is our starting point. There's a joy deep down in all of us, and the world didn't give it to us, it's just there. That love that you feel that wasn't somehow manufactured, it comes from deeper wells. All of us have been through some of the hardest circumstances people can go through. All of us. And yet we are still here. We are acknowledging that the world as it is, because we think it makes us stronger and healthier, and it allows us to move through it. It allows us to celebrate. Amen. Let's sing. Justice, and the world is better because you're here. Go in peace, go in love. Amen.
This joy